Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So all of you are aware, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. To ensure an orderly meeting, a few points I do want to highlight. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. For members participating in person, proceed as you usually would when the whole committee is meeting in person in the committee room. Keep in mind the directives from the Board of Internal Economy regarding masking and health protocols. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Those in the room, your microphone will be controlled as normal by the proceedings and verification officer. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed to the chair. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. With regard to a speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do the best we can, as always, to maintain the order of speaking for all members, whether they are participating virtually or in person. Pursuant to Standing Committee 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, October 29th, 2020, the committee is meeting today to continue its study on the Canada Infrastructure Bank. It's my pleasure to introduce as well as welcome all our witnesses. First off, we have from the Canadians for Tax Fairness, Toby Sanger, Executive Director. From CUPE, we have Robert Ramsey, the Senior Research Officer, and Matthew Vick, Researcher. From First Nations Major Projects Coalition, we have Chief Charlene Gale, the Chair, and Nilo Edwards, Executive Director. From National Trade Contractors Coalition of Canada, we have Sandra Skifsky, Chair. And Sandra, I apologize if I didn't pronounce that right, but I have here Skifsky. And if when you do have a chance to get the floor, you can correct me if I did pronounce that wrong. And once again, I do apologize if I did. As well as from Queen's University, we have Dr. Ryan Riordan, Assistant Professor, Institute for Sustainable Finance. So with that, I will begin the meeting. Welcome all the witnesses, and we'll start off with each one of you for 5 minutes. Mr. Sanger, you have the floor for that 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair and members of the committee, and thank you for inviting me to this meeting. I'm going to start off talking about the initial idea for the Canada Infrastructure Bank was fundamentally flawed. It involved low-cost public financing to leverage much higher cost private financing to fund public infrastructure. The CIB's initial model was a version of public-private partnerships. However, not one of Canada's P3 projects has transparently demonstrated their value for money. Instead, they've relied on inflated calculations of risk avoided and inflated discount rates to minimize future costs in order to justify what is essentially a much more expensive off-book financing of public infrastructure. In her review of 74 Ontario P3s, the Ontario Auditor General concluded that these value for money assessments were fundamentally flawed and that the P3 projects cost about 28% and $8 billion more than publicly financed alternatives would. It makes no sense for public infrastructure to be financed with expensive private financing at rates of 7% and higher when governments can borrow at a fraction of that, now less than 2% over 30 years. No homeowner or business would do that. It's especially absurd now for governments to use much higher cost private financing for public infrastructure when the federal government is so widely using low-cost public financing to lend to private businesses through the BDC, EDC, CMHC, and now through the CEBA program. The only purpose that P3s fill is to engage in some off-book financing and provide private finance with lucrative, low-risk investment opportunities that taxpayers will cover for decades to come. And if these projects are really privatized, we will undoubtedly end up with some really inadequate infrastructure, as the UK has. A recent survey of UK businesses found that 3/4 were unhappy with the state of infrastructure there, and they've started renationalizing it. In a report I wrote 4 years ago, I argued that the CIB model was flawed and that the federal government should establish a truly public infrastructure bank instead. similar to the BDC, EDC, and CMHC. I'm relieved to say that the past 4 years have shown that the critics of the CIB were right. Even Bay Street in Canada's financial sector were highly skeptical of the CIB, and it struggled to find any projects beyond the REM to invest in. It hasn't come close to leveraging the additional $4 in private finance initially proposed. After 4 years, the REM is the only project somewhat consistent with its original vision, and it can hardly be considered a success. It is controversial. The environmental review raised big concerns, and despite forging ahead, it will be delayed for a number of years and likely go significantly over budget. Um, but I'm very happy to say that I don't see these failures of the CIB to achieve its original vision as negative. Instead, I think this government and the CIB are on their way to turning a sow's ear into a silk purse. Many of the projects the CIB is involved in haven't involved private financing, at least not yet. Instead, they use federal dollars to leverage projects in the broader public sector, leveraging additional public funds. And that's a very good thing. They seem to be reinventing the CIB into a bank that operates more along the lines that I had suggested, and I'd like to commend the government and the minister for doing that. Other planned initiatives appear to be excellent ideas, including the zero emission bus initiative or the commercial building retrofit initiatives. These will harness low cost public financing to help both the public and private sectors make major strides in the transition to a more sustainable economy. I strongly urge the government to go further and remake the CIB into a truly green infrastructure bank for Canada. The bank should also set up funds and programs in other areas to provide low cost public financing for things such as community renewable energy projects, energy retrofitting of public infrastructure buildings, schools, hospitals, public and low income housing, municipalities, Indigenous communities, and some private nonprofit projects as well. As the CIB has a high threshold for consideration and approval of projects, it could partner with regional development agencies to deliver these financing programs more broadly. The CIB could also make a virtue out of these projects by issuing green bonds with a federal government guarantee to raise additional funds for the many investors interested in impact investing. But one thing the bank shouldn't do is use high cost private financing to privatize public infrastructure. But there are a lot of really important and exciting things the bank could and should do to help Canadians recover from the pandemic and build back better. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions and discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Sanger. Great job. And now we're going to move on to our second speaker. We have, let me just see here. We have Mr. Ramsey from CUPE. Mr. Ramsey, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to speak. First, I'll just say that CUPE agrees that infrastructure investment is one of the best ways to drive economic growth, and I think we all share that understanding. Next, I'll say this: the Canada Infrastructure Bank is not what we were told it would be. In 2015, many of us from across the political spectrum got very excited about the idea of a public infrastructure bank. The purpose of this proposed public bank was, quote, to provide low-cost financing for infrastructure projects. And there are very good examples of public infrastructure banks, both internationally and domestically. These entities provide low cost loans in both the public and private sectors for infrastructure projects at many scales. They are public entities that pool assets and share risk, and the state can guarantee the bonds they issue on the capital markets. So they are stable and highly attractive investments. In Canada, the Municipal Finance Authority of British Columbia provides a good example of what a national infrastructure bank could achieve. Originally seeded with public money, the MFA has evolved to offer not only long-term capital financing, but also a range of financial tools to municipalities, some of these in partnership with private financial institutions. I could also mention, as Mr. Sanger just did, the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, the Business Development Bank of Canada, EDC, all lending institutions that provide low-cost loans well below the private sector borrowing rate. The CIB, on the other hand, provides Canadians with less value for money. The federal government can borrow at significantly lower rates than the private sector, almost historically low rates, making any CIB project financed with private equity much more expensive. This is not consistent with best practices. But here are three things the CIB could do immediately to become a more effective financier of public infrastructure. One, fund projects directly. This is the fastest and most effective way to get infrastructure built and to begin addressing the infrastructure gap. The government already does this via the gas tax fund with great success. And as I mentioned, we have other good examples of public financing institutions right here. So why not look to a model that works rather than one that clearly doesn't? Two, scrap the bank's P3 mandates. Privatization and P3s do not work for public infrastructure or public services. Countries that went down this road over previous decades are reversing course. A 2019 study by the Transnational Institute that we contributed to found over 1,400 cases in 58 countries where privatized or P3 public infrastructure and services were brought back into the public sector. Why? Because privatization and P3s have failed. It's a dead end model for the public sector and wholly inadequate in this moment to address the prevailing challenges of our time: climate change, inequality, escalating public health crises, and more. Only a strong public sector can do this. Three, amends the governance structure so that provinces and municipalities have a seat at the table. A governing model that includes rather than excludes the municipal stakeholders will better ensure the CIB keeps the public interest at the fore. Thanks for your attention. I'm going to give the rest of my time to my colleague, Matt.
Mr. Vick, floor is yours. You have 2.5 minutes. Mr. Vick, you're on mute.
Hi, thanks for having me.
No
So
problem,
as
welcome.
Bobby said, this bank could do a lot of good for municipalities, and QP, would like this to work well. The problem is that you can't actually build public projects in the public interest while also letting investors take control of the asset and make decisions based on profit. If you try to do that, what you get is some of the problems we've been having with the bank, and there's a huge trade-off as the public loses control over the asset, loses oversight, loses accountability, and the infrastructure isn't built anymore where and how it makes the more sense for the public. It's built where and how it will make the most money for the investor. L'exemple du réseau express métropolitain, le REM à Montréal, c'est un exemple.
Let's take as an example the REM in Montreal, which has been geared in favor of private investors. And I hope I'm wrong, because I would love for the REM to be functioning properly in Montreal. But let me provide you with a number of examples of negative in investments, and particularly when the discount is applied.
But in reality, 12 of those stations were a commuter train, which was already electrified, which was basically almost new, which worked very well. It was the best performing commuter train we had. And we're going to bulldoze this commuter train, spend $1.2 billion to rebuild exactly in the same place this new REM. So I think most would say that it's not well spent money when we could have used that $1 billion, $1.2 billion to go into areas where there's not enough transit and people have been asking for transit for many, many years. There was also a law that was created where the REM and the construction along two of the antennas was carved out completely of past and future environmental assessments. So I don't think there's many people here that could tell me that that is in the interest of the environment or of the public.
Thank you, Mr. Vick. Thank you, Mr. Vick.
Okay.
You've reached that limit. Thank you.
Thank
Well
you.
done. I'm now going to move on to Chief Gale. Chief Gale and Mr. Edwards, welcome. Chief Gale, you have the floor for 5 minutes. We're not hearing Chief Gale. Doesn't seem you're on mute. You may want to just make sure your switch is on your microphone.
Hey, are you hearing me?
There you go. There you
Okay.
go.
I apologize.
No problem. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you from the unceded Treaty 8 territory of my home, Fort Nelson First Nation, located in northeast corner of British Columbia. With me today is Coalition Executive Director Neil Edwards, who leads our organization's service delivery to our members. The Coalition is a First Nation-led, non-political, not-for-profit business capacity organization, and our mandate is to provide impartial and independent business capacity to our members and support their ability to make informed business decisions regarding their participation in major natural resource and infrastructure projects. We have roughly over 70 First Nations located across Canada that have become members of the Coalition, and our services are active on 5 major projects, which represent a combined total capital cost of $7 billion. We see a role for the Canada Infrastructure Bank to play in filling a critical gap concerning capital access for First Nations and all Indigenous people. Access to capital at competitive rates is a barrier to achieving broad-based economic participation by Indigenous people in major projects. Capital markets require a certain level of equity to be placed at risk in order to lend at normal commercial terms. The requirement for at-risk capital is a barrier for most Indigenous communities across Canada who do not have the financial standing to meet the basic terms set by the capital markets. For Canada, inaction poses a risk to the investment climate. In addition to the stagnation of economic growth that would otherwise see a boost from unlocking new activity, for Indigenous communities, inaction means a continuation of the status quo, no increase to the standards of living, no advancement towards achieving self-determination. And in 2019, the First Nation Major Projects Coalition put our tools to the test on a real-time commercial equity opportunity at the request of 12 First Nations. From the beginning, the First Nation Major Projects Coalition supported our members' ability to form a limited partnership. We submitted a bid, formed a bidding partnership with 2 other institutional investors, and we conducted a commercial market sounding all in a matter of 5 months. This exercise resulted in an opportunity cost for the First Nation when they were forced to forfeit their equity interest late in the project due to uncompetitive costs to capital. And this result validated that the coalition's position that capital markets remain a challenging place for First Nations to raise competitive cost of capital without credit enhancements from government or third parties. We understand that the CIB was established to, in part, to serve the financial needs of projects that are commercially viable, but may not qualify for traditional financing through the capital markets. Canada has no national strategy to support Indigenous capital access. So expanding the CIB's mandate to include equity-style loans to support Indigenous ownership of major projects would correct that gap. Doing this does not involve setting up more government bureaucracy, and it does not come at the cost increase to taxpayers. What does have a cost is the opportunity of not expanding access to capital for equity ownership by Indigenous communities. Delays and increased costs in achieving the informed consent of Indigenous people concerning major project development within their territories has an impact on the economic future of Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians alike. A recent analysis of 4 major projects done by National Bank concluded that the average increased cost per project of 28.5% and the average construction timeline was nearly 3 years due to delayed timelines in various lawsuits. At the same time, the way in which the world invests is changing. Sustainable investing with a focus on ESG standards is rising. Investors want to know what the social economic impacts of their investments will be on Indigenous and non-Indigenous populations before they decide whether they're going to invest or not. Canada must act to support a national strategy on Indigenous capital access. Not doing so will increase investors' risk in Canada, leading to trends of capital flight and capital avoidance. For our coalition, we are finding that including Indigenous nations as equity owners is a very effective way to get our informed consent while ensuring we benefit from resource development and have control over environmental and social impacts. The bottleneck right now for our nations to access that capital, well, there is a natural role for the infrastructure bank to play, and that will remove that bottleneck and unleash economic growth. So I look forward to your questions, and Masi Cho, hi.
Miigwech, Chief, Gail, and well done. We're now going to move on to our next speaker, Ms. Skifsky.
Madame Skifsky, vous avez 5 minutes. Oui, merci bien. Vous avez bien prononcé mon nom.
Here today. My name is Sandra Skifsky. I am the current chair of the National Trade Contractors Council of Canada, also known as NTCCC. NTCCC is a group of like-minded national organizations that represent about 12,000 firms across Canada, and we work on issues common to the interest of those trade contractors. Trade contractors are a tier or 2 levels away from the planning and design of these major projects. A lot of other partners are in the discussions. We come in at the tail end, but it's important to remember that 80 to 90% of the people you see working on a job site are employed by these trade contractors.
Ms. Skibsky, if I may interject, can you just lift that mic up a bit, just a bit, and so it doesn't pop for the interpreters? That's great.
All right.
Wonderful.
Thank
you. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
So when the Canada Infrastructure Bank was created in 2017, we looked forward with the anticipation to this sort of new public partnership to bolster infrastructure spending on projects across Canada. These investments are instrumental to job creation and growth for our sector and for the economy. However, we're disappointed with the delay in committed infrastructure dollars making their way to projects, including the $35 billion that was initially allocated to the CIB. Detailed data is either not readily available or I couldn't find it, but it appears there's 12 or 13 projects that the state CIB was involved with. Only 5 have financial commitments of about $4 billion, and only a small portion of that, I think 1.2, and I heard it mentioned earlier, that's been forwarded to an active project. It would seem that the benefits flowing from these investments are really long-term considerations. And long-term, large-scale projects are important to update and transform Canada's infrastructure for the future. However, they do not address more immediate issues faced by communities and the construction industry that we are currently experiencing. The construction industry performed well in 2020, but there are signs that 2021 could be a far more difficult year for the sector based on a number of issues, including supply chain, workforce development, and sort of limited access to the public and private funding that begets projects. The CIB also has very specific target sectors for investment, and while all of them are critical to Canada, work in those sectors only applies to a portion of the construction industry. Other sectors of construction are equally important to sustaining and creating growth in communities of all sizes and should be part of an infrastructure plan. CIB's growth plan may address some of these gaps being faced by trade contractors. Obviously, involved in, building new transport facilities, broadband retrofit, green infrastructure. But again, it's only a benefit if those projects are shovel in the ground, which is not quite the same as shovel ready. Getting investments to the construction industry now is imperative in ensuring economic growth and prosperity as we recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. However, given the systemic lags between the planning stages to the actual project starts, it is unlikely that this infrastructure spending, even if accelerated, will reach the stage where it will aid the industry in navigating the impacts from the 21 or this year from the pandemic. There's a perceived shortfall of work that's looming on the near-term horizon for the industry. And when the industry's view of the market is uncertain, it tends to curtail investment and workforce development, even in light of long-term forecasts of labor shortages. Without investment in new construction of projects, trade contractors will be reluctant to hire in the short term as they will be cautious about expanding and maintaining that workforce. This hesitancy created by the uncertainty around future work has significant impacts on training regimes and creates difficulty in supporting initiatives that bring more people into the trades. Without the ability to create jobs and facilitate workforce development, the industry faces significant challenges in meeting the demand for Canada's future infrastructure demands. There needs to be some short-term adjustment to the deployment of infrastructure funding to bridge uncertain waters that the industry is treading. There also needs to be a clear and long-term vision of future work, and I believe it was mentioned at one of the presentations of a 25-year plan that will instill confidence and allow the industry to optimize its role in Canada's recovery. And we look forward to seeing how the CIB evolves into supporting that role. The construction industry has historically led Canada's economic growth, and we are ready to help rebuild that economy again. Thank you, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Ms. Skibsky. We're now going to move on to our last speaker from Queen's University, Mr. Rodan. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Dr. Ryan Reardon. As the last name you certainly got right. Most people pronounce it Riordan or something else, so I was happy to hear it pronounced. I'm a distinguished professor of finance at the Smith School of Business at Queen's. I'm also, and probably the reason I'm here, the director of research for the Institute for Sustainable Finance. It's a first of its kind collaborative hub that fuses academia, the private sector, and government. And our sole focus is increasing Canada's sustainable finance capacity. I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to appear here today on behalf of the Institute and to contribute to the study of the Canada Infrastructure Bank. First off, I would like to make two proactive disclosures. First, the Institute for Sustainable Finance is supported by Queen's University, the Ivy Foundation, McConnell Foundation, McCall McBain, and the Chisholm Thompson Foundation. Importantly, also in November 2020, Canada's 5 largest banks, TD Bank, Scotiabank, CIBC, BMO, and RBC, announced $5 million to support the ISF. Second, and I think more pertinent to the conversation, I want to disclose that Aaron Corey, CEO of Canada's Infrastructure Bank, is a member of the Institute for Sustainable Finance Advisory Board, and this is effective as of February 2021. In furtherance of the Institute's goals, we also established a Canadian Sustainable Finance Network, which is a national independent research and educational network that consists of nearly 73 academics and 23 universities from across Canada. So if I could return to the focus of the committee's study, I'd like to highlight a report from September 2020 that the ISF released. It's called the Capital Mobilization Plan for a Canadian Low Carbon Economy. Was a what we call, but of course it's a little bit of self-promotion, but a landmark research report that provides a concrete data-driven capital blueprint for Canada's low carbon transition. So in the study, we looked at regional and sectoral investments necessary to reduce carbon emissions in line with the Paris Accord 2030 target of a 30% reduction of our 2005 emissions. Now, the most salient conclusion from our report is that in Canada, we require an investment of roughly $128 billion over the next 10 years to achieve these targets. Substantial, no doubt, but far from insurmountable. Just for a little bit of context, and I'll get to the private sector soon, the $12.8 billion annual investment represents just, and you can see my air quotes perhaps, but just 0.62% of Canada's 2018 GDP, or 2.7% of annual provincial tax revenues. So if you use a private sector comparator, this is less than 10% of annual capital expenditures for TSX listed firms. In fact, if our large publicly traded Canadian firms devoted just 5% of their annual capital expenditure to GHG abatement products over the next decade, that would provide more than half of the investment that we require to meet our 2030 goals. Importantly, there is already significant evidence to suggest that private capital is committed and is already flowing. As outlined in our report, the Canada Infrastructure Bank will be, we think, an effective avenue to encourage and stimulate public-private partnerships as one of the many avenues to help mobilize private capital. The report highlights 4 sectors as critical: buildings, transportation, oil and gas and electricity, and importantly, these make up 70% of Canadian emissions. The building sector is Canada's lowest hanging fruit. It's the only sector that we identified where reducing carbon emission is less expensive than maintaining them. So a small financial or behavioral nudge in this sector will help us to unlock large environmental, but also economic benefits. Transportation is important, of course, in a country as large as Canada. It's our highest stakes play, and public-private partnerships can be an effective way to mobilize capital. And electricity and oil and gas are the big bets that we need to get right. And so cooperative efforts between these two sectors will help to accelerate sort of our capital and our expertise shifts from oil and gas to electricity. We expect capital flow to continue and accelerate over the next decade, not only despite the unique economic challenges brought on by the pandemic, but as a result of it. And financing mechanisms such as green bonds, transition bonds, green investment trusts, and blended finance models in the form of public-private partnerships will help to form the basis for these new financing vehicles. Finally, I think that Canada, or the ISF thinks as well, must invest in a robust data and reporting infrastructure that allows for our public and our private firms to publicly display their successes in reducing their environmental impact. Timely, granular, and accessible environmental data will support the government and the CIB in identifying opportunities for investment programs with the most impact. Importantly, it will also help to attract the required domestic and international private capital to Canada to finance the Canadian transition to a low carbon economy. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you once again, and I look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Riordan. I appreciate it. Again, great job. Members, we do have 15 minutes left before we have to vote. I'm not sure if any members have to shoot over to the House from your offices in Ottawa. Is that the case for any members? So everyone has some flexibility here to go a bit further. I was thinking about running it right down to 5 minutes. Is that fine? Okay, great. So we have our list of speakers in our first round for 6 minutes each. 6 minutes each. We have, starting off with the Conservatives, we have Mr. Scheer, followed by the Liberals, Mr. Sidhu, followed by the Bloc, Mr. Barceau-Duval, and finally to Mr. Bachrach of the NDP. Mr. Scheer, you have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And once again, I'd like to thank all the witnesses for some very thoughtful presentations. While there may be different perspectives expressed, I certainly do appreciate all the time and effort that you've gone into this as the committee tries to understand exactly what is wrong with the Canadian Infrastructure Bank. You know, this institution that was supposed to lead to billions and billions of dollars of private sector money rushing in to help get big projects built has, of course, delivered 0 completed projects in the 4 years that it has been in existence. And its recent quarterly report shows that it has lost over $110 million of taxpayers' money without anything to show for it. So that's what this committee is all about. So it's great to hear some of the perspective from those who may object to P3s and public-private partnerships philosophically, and those that support them as a concept, but understand that the bank itself has a flawed model here, and that's what this committee is trying to get to the bottom of. So I'd like to start with Miss, and I hope I have as much success as our chair did with pronouncing your last name, but Miss Skibitsky, about some of the comments that she made, in particular about what she said about the shortfall of work, about how there's a perception that that there could be a looming shortfall of work. What we hear from a lot of municipalities is that it's not that there are a lot of shovel-ready projects. There are many applications have been put in for work. So what is causing this perception there's going to be a shortfall of work? Is it that the dollars aren't working hand? Okay, maybe you could delve into that a little bit.
There's been a lot of projects that have been delayed. I mean, so shovel-ready it's a strange concept. There's
Ms.
shovel in the
Miss, I'm sorry. I
Am I-
apologize. Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, perfect. There you go. Thank you.
So there's, projects that are shovel in the ground, which means they're being built. Shovel ready means a delayed project because nobody's going to plan and put a project together and then have it sit there and kind of wait for something to happen with it. So coming into 2020, the industry had a lot of backlog. 2019 was a really good year for construction. There was a lot of backlog that carried them through. That backlog isn't there. So even though they're working, they're doing things, but when they look sort of out a few months, there isn't that confidence that the level of work will stay with them. And I've heard some, talking with the engineering groups, when the designers start seeing kind of gaps in their workflow, that's translating down to real construction in a matter of months. And so that is it's the weakness when they looked at even Q3 and Q4 of this year. There isn't that flow of projects. And of course, sorry. Go ahead.
So so am I correct in understanding that it's not because there couldn't be projects? It's not that they've built everything that needs building. It's that projects are waiting on approvals. Is that kind of the
approvals, financing? There's many reasons, and there's other issues going on. I mean, the supply chain has been disrupted for a lot of different materials and products. We haven't recovered the full labor force for construction. I mean, we were still below like pre-pandemic levels. So there's a lot of issues, but not having certainty of work has all sorts of implication on construction in terms of hiring, in terms of investing, in your own business, and the ability of taking on work. Like when a whole bunch of work comes out all at once and it looks really busy, that's not good either, because it's very hard to take on, many projects from the start, especially for trade contractors who I represent. I mean, we're talking mostly small, medium-sized enterprises. And when they start a job, they're in 2 months of their own money before they get paid, just, from the way the contracts roll out. So you take on too much work, you could damage your cash flow and have a hard time. When you don't have enough work, you are very cautious about adding to it. So, well, there's a lot of plans at the federal level, and we appreciate them, obviously, to look at the workforce and develop that workforce, but it
Yeah.
needs
So,
projects.
so thank you for that, and I'm just conscious of the time that I've got. So you mentioned one of the frustrations I share with you is the kind of lack of details that are on the Infrastructure Bank's website.
I mean,
And
I love data, so yeah.
no, well, good data makes good decisions. And when I hear officials at the bank, both past and present, talking about this 4 times multiplier, this idea that for every dollar of taxpayers' money that would be put into these projects, we'd be unlocking 4 times minimum, maybe even 7 times the private sector investment. Of the projects that you are able to look at on the bank's website, do you see any evidence of that? Is there any sign that private sector investment houses are pouring their money in?
I couldn't even begin to comment, because all it listed was the financial commitment from the bank. And then there was a memorandum, like I went through some of it, but to see that leverage, I didn't see it. The bottom line is there's only one active project that had any money. I mean, promises, announcements, those are all great. They don't affect my members until they're actually working on it. So when it's an active project, then there's a benefit. Up until that point, it's a hope and a dream, because they've participated in projects. There was a water plant in Mapleton or something. It was supposed to be a 20 mil. That was delayed or taken off the book. So anything in the planning process is still suspect to becoming an active project.
Thank you, Ms. Kiski. And thank you, Mr. Chair. We're now going to move on to Mr. Sidhu for 6 minutes. Mr. Sidhu, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How much time do we have till the vote? I'm just
I'm sorry.
8 minutes.
I'm
8
sorry.
minutes.
I'm sorry. I was on mute there. I'm sorry, Manny.
8 minutes.
We have 7 minutes and 47 seconds, and you have 6 minutes. So floor is yours. Go ahead for 6 minutes.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you to our witnesses for joining us here today and sharing your thoughts and views. I remember speaking with so many residents in Brampton back in 2019, and many of them were worried that, the Conservatives were looking to make $18 billion in cuts to infrastructure when a growing city like Brampton requires more investments. I know infrastructure is top of mind for so many of my constituents. And
That's just false. That's just false.
I'm sorry, I got the floor, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Sidhu has the floor, please. Thank you. Mr. Sidhu,
I know infrastructure is top of mind for so many of my constituents. I'm proud to say our Liberal government has invested over $45 million into Brampton Transit, which is the largest investment over 10 years into Brampton Transit. The $38 million into the River Rock project will ensure the resilience of the city while creating jobs. So what I'm getting at is the importance of infrastructure, and I'm proud to see our government's commitment to infrastructure. I wanted to address that first and foremost. My first question is to Chief Gale. Chief, you had spoke about the importance of infrastructure, especially to the First Nation Indigenous communities. We know that there's a growing infrastructure deficit in this country, especially in Indigenous communities. Can you please speak to how the Infrastructure Bank can help to address this critical deficit?
Chief Gale.
Okay, so our members have been advocating for equity ownership in projects for a long time. And there's many reasons for this, because equity means partnership. And a lot of our projects that our First Nations are working on are missing that partnership piece. And partnership allows us to have a say in all aspects of the projects, whether it is, let's say, a Trans Mountain or another project. Partnerships with Indigenous communities always leads to better outcomes. And I just also wanted to say that, just in case I don't get another question, is that The work that we're doing at the coalition has been very beneficial to our members for the fact that we're gaining new tools on how to make these decisions. And I just wanted to also invite you guys to a renewable energy announcement that Fort Nelson First Nation is going to be announcing tomorrow at 11 Pacific time. And it just shows you what can be done at the ground when we have the tools to make informed decisions with our members. So I just wanted to share that with you. Thank you.
Mr. Sadhu?
Thank you, Chief Gill. And no, definitely, I'll be coming back to you with another question here, so you'll have plenty of time. When Minister McKenna joined us a few weeks ago, she spoke about the important project that the Canada Infrastructure Bank is working on, namely the Kivalak, pardon my pronunciation, the hydro-free link, which will provide clean power to First Nation communities in the north. Can you speak to how these type of projects help forge important partnerships and good jobs in these communities?
Chief Gill?
Well, we all know that the environmental impacts are very important when it comes to making decisions on infrastructure projects for First Nations. And it's more beneficial when First Nations have a say from the ground up into the boardroom level. And and also with having the opportunity to be involved in the project at day one. I feel that when you do that, you're going to have less delays and less maybe things that have to go through the courts. But just with those kind of things, they're very important to First Nations, and I think that it's a good way to move forward, especially on projects like that are so meaningful to the communities, and it really gives them more of a hand up than a handout when they're directly involved and they're participating in the project and making those informed decisions and bringing back to membership so that they can make those decisions together with their elders and their community members.
Mr. Sadhu?
Thank you for those important insights. And my next question is for Dr. Reardon. You mentioned effective avenues to stimulate public-private partnerships could be done through the Canada Infrastructure Bank. You also mentioned $120 billion investments are required. Can you please speak to some of your thoughts on what sustainable investments or investments that reduce carbon emissions look like to you and lead us to a low carbon economy?
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the question. So in our report, we highlight a number of investments. The first one is in the retrofitting industry in the buildings. So we identified sort of 4 areas for investment. One was buildings, and I think the Canada Infrastructure Bank has already made strides there, announcing their retrofitting program. The next one was in transportation. We live in a big country. Even 50 or 100 years from now, we're still going to have to get from coast to coast to coast. And so this is certainly something that we need to address. So one of the other areas that we highlighted was electrification. So the new electric bus recommendations. And then we also highlighted oil and gas and electricity. So oil and gas, we looked at investments in things like carbon capture and storage and using electricity to help us get off some of our fossil fuels, or at least slowly transition from fossil fuels to renewable energies. And so those would be the 3 or 4 investments that we highlighted as being both environmentally positive, but also economically, I think, win-wins for the country.
Thank you, Mr. Reardon, and thank you, Mr. Sadhu. We are now going to take this opportunity to suspend to vote, and we'll be back as soon as the vote is over. So for all of you, if you want to move on to the House virtually and on your apps, you'll be set to go. Thank you. 6 minutes. Mr. Barceau-Duval, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is for Mr. Sangar. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Earlier, you criticized the infrastructure bank. You said that in Great Britain, for example, they decided to buy back infrastructures that had been given to the private sector. In your opinion, what would be a better use of the money of this bank? This is $35 billion after all. How could we better spend it or use it?
Thank you very much. Yes, I wrote a report 4 years ago saying that the infrastructure bank should be turned into a truly public infrastructure bank, where it can provide low cost financing to help lever other public finances. And in the UK, actually, the Chancellor just announced a national infrastructure bank. It's partly modeled on the CIB, but it's in some sort of ways we're not quite clear how it's going to go. But it's very focused on green infrastructure. As I said, I just don't think that we should be using much higher cost private finance, which costs many multiples of the cost of public finance to finance public infrastructure. But there, and as I said, I do think that they could turn it into a truly green infrastructure bank, where we can use the low cost of public finance. I mean, the government is already doing it in a whole lot of ways for a lot of areas of the of the private sector. So we should be using that public finance to meet the big challenge of climate change, and extend low cost public finance to a whole lot of other sectors of the broader public sector. The zero emission bus initiative sounds really great, but it could be extended in a whole lot of different ways to indigenous communities, housing, retrofit.
Je vais devoir vous interrompre parce que j'aimerais pouvoir vous poser.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. It's just that I have other questions I'd like to ask you. Currently, we're seeing that the Canada Infrastructure Bank was going to lobby private companies in order to obtain projects from them, because one of the criticisms against the bank was that it had no projects. It was just sitting there useless. Do you think it might pose a risk for such a bank to actively engage with the private market and ask them to take their money, instead of asking itself what needs do our society have? Absolutely. I mean, they've got things backwards on that. I mean, I thought it was great that the government had identified a number of different areas, particularly in terms of climate change, that they want to allocate some funding for, and focus on those priorities. And they should be focusing on the government priorities in these ways, and the Canadian priorities, and not the priorities of whatever private finance, whatever private financier or whatever company comes along. I mean, otherwise you're just playing to the highest profit, and that's not what we need in our society right now. We've had increasing inequality, and we've got a climate crisis as well. We should be really driving, and the government has started to do this with their climate change plan, what the priorities of the government and Canadians more broadly are.
Mr. Barceau-Duval.
Vous avez parlé de.
Now, you spoke about Great Britain, which was a failed experiment. Do you have any other examples anywhere else in the world where they've set up the same kind of bank with the same kind of result? Well, there have been a lot of public investment banks around the world. Canada has some ourselves. I mean, the one in the UK was just announced. We don't really know what it's going to be. They do want to rely on some private finance. I think that that's a mistake. One thing that they do have in their proposal is that the federal government could lend at basically 60 basis points above what the central government, the gilt rate is. And that's something similar to what provinces do through their municipal financing corporation. A number of provinces, they provide much more lower cost financing for municipalities. It just makes sense. It's pooling capital and getting lower cost loans for public infrastructure.
Mr. Barceau-Duval.
Merci, Monsieur.
Mr. Reardon, you mentioned that we'd need a financial plan to properly develop infrastructures in Canada, and you said that we need a financially, rather an environmentally responsible plan and vision. That's a little bit like what Mr. Sanger was saying, but Canada's infrastructure bank doesn't work that way. Even its constituting law says that when the infrastructure bank invests, it's as if the government of Canada was investing in this project. And we know that the government of Canada hasn't always respected provincial environmental standards or municipal standards. Do you think this might be a risk in terms of the environment?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I'm certainly not an expert on the statutes of the CIB or of their mandate federally, municipally, or provincially. I would say that the evidence that I've seen recently with the announcement of the retrofitting programs and with the electric buses certainly suggests that the projects that they're looking to support are consistent with a green transition. So if you look to the recent evidence, I'd say that.
Thank you, Mr. Riordan. Thank you, Mr. Barceau-Duval. We're now going to move on to the NDP. And on behalf of the NDP, Mr. Bachrach, you have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to all of our witnesses. It's been very interesting hearing from you so far. My first questions are for Mr. Sanger. Mr. Sanger, in 2017, you studied the Canada Infrastructure Bank, and you found that the private financing model that the bank was pursuing could end up costing the Canadian public twice as much as it might otherwise if other models were pursued. I'm wondering if you could speak a bit to your methodology and what is really a pretty shocking conclusion, and why the public could end up paying so much more for these infrastructure projects.
Mr. Sanger.
Thank you for the question. Yes, I mean, I was looking at the difference in the borrowing rates, and in fact, those differences have widened even more. So the cost for it would be even greater right now. As you all know, the federal government's borrowing rates are considerably lower. Meanwhile, I mean, for an example of the REM, the private partner is expecting to get rates of return of 8 or 9% on this, and the federal government is lending at 1%. I don't have problems with the federal government lending at low rates for public infrastructure, but I don't think that those should go to private profit in that way. One thing that I had found surprising after that was that Bay Street was highly skeptical about the CIB for a number of reasons. So I think that explains some of the certainly some of the problems that it's had.
Mr. Bachrach.
Thank you, Mr. Sanger, for that response. Now, who exactly ends up paying these higher costs for infrastructure? And are there specific groups in Canadian society who could potentially end up paying more than others under this private model of investment?
Absolutely. I mean, either taxpayers are paying it through their taxes and the cost. Um, um, uh, Members have talked about the cost and the losses through the CIB, um, or else individuals and households are paying it through increased user fees. And that was part of the big model for the CIB. They expected each one to be a revenue generating project. And those costs largely fall on their user fees. They're very regressive. They fall on those who are using the service. So this was a shift from a lot of the traditional P3s that Canada's had, which in recent years haven't involved user fees. Basically, the public sector has directly paid for it, but the idea behind the CIB was to rely much more on user fees, and increasing those would be increased costs for households, for ordinary Canadians.
Mr. Bachrach?
And what do you feel is the most cost-effective means of financing public infrastructure?
Well, absolutely. It's the federal government lending money at its rate. I mean, the federal government can borrow at historically low rates, and it should be doing it part to helping other levels of government and the broader public sector to build the infrastructure that we need. Mr. Reardon, it was great to hear from him about areas in which that we could confront the climate crisis. Federal government can certainly afford that, and do that in partnership with provinces, municipalities, the broader public sector, and Indigenous communities as well.
Okay,
Mr.
thank you,
Bachrach?
Mr. Sanger. I'm going to shift now onto our witnesses from CUPE, Mr. Vick and Mr. Ramsey, and either of you can take this question. Earlier this week, the committee heard from Professor Heather Whiteside of the University of Waterloo, and she talked about the CIB's recently unveiled unsolicited proposal framework, which really deprioritizes the public interest in favor of the interests of the investors. I'm wondering what your take on this is, and whether you have concerns about this shift in focus that has been announced, whereby the bank is going to be taking projects out to the private sector and trying to get them interested in those projects.
Gentlemen? Jump in. Mr. Ramsey?
Sure, I can start. Well, I think Professor Whiteside identified a central contradiction in the CIB model, which is attempting to balance or uh, uh, having the objective of building infrastructure in the public interest to meet specific needs that Canadian society has, while at the same time meeting the profit imperative of the private sector. The two are in contradiction to each other, and the unsolicited bid program is really a great example of that in its purest form, in which the private sector can approach the CIB and say, here's where we'd like to make money. We'd like a public subsidy in order to do it.
Thank you, Mr. Ramsey, and thank you, Mr. Bachrach. We're now going to move on to the second round of questions. We have first off for the Conservatives, Ms. Cusi, followed by, I believe, Mr. Rogers for the Liberals, Mr. Barceau-Duval for the Bloc, and Mr. Bachrach for the NDP. Ms. Cusi, floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Before proceeding, I'm actually going to go and move the motion which I had put on notice, if I can, please.
Go ahead, Ms. Cusi.
Thank you. So it's dated Friday, March 5th, 2021, that pursuant to the order of reference from the House dated February 25th, the committee invite the Minister of Transport and Minister of Infrastructure and Communities to appear for no fewer than 2 hours each regarding the main estimates 2021, 2022, that this meeting be televised if possible, and that this meeting take place no later than May 31st, 2021. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Cusi. Any questions or comments for that motion? I don't see any hands raised. Mr. Sidhu, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't know if we can hold the ministers 2 hours or not, but I think 1 hour maybe more feasible with the department answering the second round. I think that would get to our technical questions as well. So I'm not sure if what my colleagues feel about that. Just want to throw up there.
Thank you, Mr. Sidhu. Mr. Bachrach?
Well, just to note that I believe we only received notice of this motion yesterday, so I'm wondering how this falls within our. I see the clerk shaking his head, so maybe the clerk can just make a clarification on notice.
Mr. Clerk?
Yeah, actually, it's a different motion. The one we received yesterday is on a different subject matter.
Thank you, Mr.
My
Clerk.
mistake.
Mr. Bachrach?
Thank you, No, my mistake. Thanks, Mr. Clerk.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Mr. Rogers?
Yeah, Mr. Chair. Again, the only thing I question about this motion is the time. 2 hours. I prefer that we amend the motion to for the ministers to appear for 1 hour each, if that's possible.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. I'll take that as an amendment. Any questions, members, to the amendment? I see 2 hands up still. Mr. Bachrach, you have a question? Your hand's still up? No? Okay, there it goes. Mr. Rogers, if you want to drop your hand as well. Any questions or comments from members to the amendment? With none, Mr. Clerk, if we can vote on the amendment, please.
Sure. Mr. Biddle.
Yes.
Monsieur El Khoury.
Oui.
Mr. Fillmore.
In favor.
Mr. Rogers.
Yes.
Mr. Sidhu.
Yes.
Mr. Cram.
In favor.
Ms. Kusi.
Oh, Mr. Fillmore, now it's you who's called my bluff in favor.
Mr. Shipley.
In favor.
Mr. Soroka.
In favor.
Mr. Barcelou Duval.
Oh.
And Mr. Bachrach.
I'm in favor as well.
The amendment carries 11-0.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk, and thank you, members. We're now going to go to the main motion as amended. Mr. Clerk, if you want to call the vote, please.
Sure. Mr. Biddle.
Yay.
Monsieur El Khoury.
En faveur.
Mr. Fillmore.
En favor.
Mr. Rogers.
Yes.
Mr. Sidhu.
Yes.
Mr. Cram.
In favor.
Ms. Kusi.
Pour.
Yes.
In favor.
Mr. Soroka.
In favor.
Monsieur Barcelou Duval.
Well, yes.
Bachrach.
In favor.
11 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk, and thank you, members. We're now going to go back to our questioning. Ms. Kusi, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I will pass my time over to MP Cram, please.
Mr. Cram, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. My questions are for Ms. Skivsky of the NTCCC. This committee heard on Tuesday from the Canadian Construction Association that one of the problems with the Canada Infrastructure Bank is that the funding buckets are not flexible enough and that this is leading to blockages in getting projects started. I was wondering if this observation matches the experience of the NTCCC and if Ms. Skivsky could share her thoughts on that.
Ms. Skivsky?
I think I alluded to that in my comments. There are certain types of projects, and they're usually the large banner projects. They have a big impact, but only on some of the construction industry. And when you're looking in at a recovery mode, you want projects of different. Oh, hold on. There we go. You want projects of different sizes and different types of projects. They can't all be just roads, bridges, energy. Some of them have got to be buildings. There's hospitals and community centers and schools and long-term care facilities. A lot of other of these sort of projects would fit in smaller communities and also spread the benefits to a larger segment of the construction industry, which does have a very good multiplier effect in terms of dollars spent on construction. in terms of employment and improving communities. There is the benefit isn't just that immediate employment you see from trade contractors, but you see, the jobs and the economic benefits that accrue to those types of smaller projects in certain communities. So you need a balance of both. As I said, the long-term major projects, I mean, they're transformative in nature and they're needed. And that's why we need that long planning horizon to be able to execute those as part of other things that go on. The issue that we have is there's, over years, there's been many announcements, but it's a long time before anything hits the ground in terms of an active project.
Mr. Graham?
So when it comes to the Canada Infrastructure Bank being of benefit to only certain types of construction firms and workers, could you, besides the examples that you listed, are there any other types of projects that or types of funding buckets, perhaps I should say, that would enable the Canada Infrastructure Bank to be more inclusive of your industry?
Ms. Skibsky?
What I would say is look at projects that aren't necessarily in the billions in all cases, smaller sized projects. Every community, different provinces, different areas, they have slightly different needs, and so to say like this type versus that type. But there's heavy civil construction or horizontal construction is referred to, vertical construction, and a mix of both. Is really what's needed for a vital construction industry and a vital economy. It's no good to build a road if there's nothing at the end of that road.
Mr. Graham?
Okay, very good. I've gotten the impression from past witnesses at this committee that the Canada Infrastructure Bank often tries to kill 2 or 3 birds with one stone. A project may have goals related to economic development or social benefits or environmental benefits and so on. And so can Ms. Skibsky provide any recommendations that she hasn't already regarding streamlining these goals to get these projects approved and started faster?
Ms. Skibsky?
So this is a two-way process. Some of the other speakers have touched on the case that the government should sort of lay out goals and objectives and then use the bank to address those, but also look for that bottom up, I guess, input into construction. I mean, there are so many different types of construction projects. If you're looking out east or west or, in the Northern Territories, everyone's got a different need. There has to be a balance of both. It's got to be sort of what is the need for that community? How does it meet the government's objectives? And how do we marry those two together? But they just can't. I mean, if you just focus on multi-billion-dollar projects that are very specific, you're doing. There's a benefit, but in my points, what I was trying to get at is that sometimes there's short-term requirements, the short-term needs. We're in a situation now when the industry is a little uncertain because there aren't those medium-sized, smaller projects out there, and they just fit a wider audience, both in terms of construction and the economy.
Thank you, Ms. Skibsky. Thank you, Mr. Graham. We're now going to move on to the Liberals. Mr. Rogers, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses today and the very varying perspectives on the infrastructure bank, of course, and the value of P3s. First question I'm going to ask is around broadband infrastructure as project, as infrastructure, and I'm going to direct it to Ms. Skibsky and then Chief Gale. We know that the broadband infrastructure, of course, is no longer just a nice service to have. It's something that's important. Canadians, especially during this pandemic, have discovered that increasingly working from home and learning remotely, and they need access to reliable broadband. While broadband projects create immediate jobs and economic activity, the key here is that Canadians now don't have access to important sectors of the economy because of the lack of broadband, and that can only be accessed digitally. So can P3s help to address the needs across the country, do you think? to have reliable networks and where they can work, where people can work and learn. And that's to Skivsky and Chief Gale.
Skivsky?
Well, and just a personal anecdote. 3 years ago, I lived right in central Etobicoke, and I couldn't get reliable internet because of where I was located in terms of access to their hubs. And so that was an eye opener for me. And yes, broadband is not a nice to have. It's a fundamental pillar, I think, of our economy, and will continue to be so. Where it needs to go, I don't have an immediate answer for that because you'd have to sort of map it up and see where the gaps are. Obviously, rural areas, remote areas, but it's one of those things. It is a catalyzer of other economic growth. I mean, you put the broadband in, but that's not the end all and be all of it. What's really important is what it allows that community to access and develop from that point onwards. It's important.
Thank you, Ms. Skivsky. Chief Gale.
Thank you. So I think more or less the government hasn't really addressed that gap for Indigenous communities, and right now we need more planning money, not just money for hardware. We need capacity and planning money directly on the ground in the communities where these issues are happening because it's currently the funding is really scarce. And I just think about our members when we were starting to go through the pandemic. A lot of them are in remote communities where the access to internet isn't good. So we had to be creative and find ways to bring that technology to them so they could participate in our meetings. And the other thing too is that in my hometown of Fort Nelson First Nation, we have to pay for data, which is very challenging and very expensive. And we're very thankful that Northwest Tel got a huge grant to enable us to get unlimited. And I just wanted to offer my colleague here, Nilo, if he has anything to add to that.
Thanks, Chief Gale. The only thing I would add for the committee's considerations is, we've been approached by our members of Northern Saskatchewan and Northern Manitoba who want to take advantage of the government's recent announcement around broadband. But as Chief Gale alluded to, that announcement is particularly focused on the hardware, the bricks and mortar of broadband. And what these communities are looking for is the ability to plan and deliver these projects in communities. And right now, there isn't even money available for feasibility studies or project planning.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. Mr. Rogers?
Yeah, to Dr. Reardon, many experts have suggested that infrastructure investments are one of the best ways to spur economic activity, especially during economic downturns. Our government has already invested billions of dollars across the country. Can you speak to the ways in which maybe P3 models can help to make the most of our public dollars?
Mr. Reardon?
Sure. I'd be happy to. Thank you. Thank you for the question. So I've noticed a lot of the discussion has been on rates of return, and I think one of the ways to think about P3 infrastructure investments is that public dollars are not inexhaustible. And so while the rate of return for public dollars are perhaps lower, we can get more projects done, encourage economic growth, jobs, by getting more projects done. And the other thing I would note is that while the funding public funding is certainly less expensive, the private sector is particularly good at identifying projects that are the most promising. So combining different sources of funding, accepting the fact that public funds are not inexhaustible, and allowing the private sector to help guide the capital to the most productive uses of the capital, sort of all lead to public-private partnerships that could increase economic growth.
Thank you, Mr. Reardon. Thank you, Mr. Rogers. We're now going to move on to Mr. Brassou-Duval for 2.5 minutes. Mr. Brassou-Duval, the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you indeed, Mr. Chair. I had started a question to Mr. Riazen regarding the potential non-compliance with the provincial or municipal legislation, because when a project receives $1 from the government, and so I'd like to hear Mr. Vig from the Council of Specialized Contractors of Canada.
Il n'y a pas de problème. Ouais, en fait, j'ai soulevé tout à l'heure le fait que, étant donné
Given the fact that it is a crown corporation and that in the statute there is a mention of the Bank of Canada, so it is as if it were funded by the federal government, and this kind of project allegedly wouldn't have to comply with the municipal and provincial legislation or regulations, which might perhaps open some flexibility regarding the environment. So do you see things for your council? Well, we have, unfortunately, the sound coming from Mr. Vic. So, after a study and a review, the project had not been accepted because they said that 90% of new users were already users of the public network. So, and they finally created a piece of legislation, and the government changed the law in order to make sure that the building would not be subjected to environmental reviews. So, yeah, this problem does exist, and again, we tried to merge the various goals and objectives of public interest and those of the private sector. Thank you indeed. Thank you indeed.
The NDP, Mr. Bachrach, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A few questions for Mr. Ramsey. We heard Ms. Skivsky talk about the need for smaller projects and for smaller communities to participate in these infrastructure programs. I know that you have worked quite a bit with the municipal sector, and I'm wondering whether the private investment model is particularly good. Does it lend itself to smaller communities? And secondly, I know that you followed very closely the experience in Mapleton. We haven't heard too much about what exactly happened there. And I wonder if you have time in your response, if you could both answer my first question and walk us through what happened in Mapleton with the proposal for the water and wastewater project there.
Ms. Skivsky?
I think that was for me, actually.
Yeah, it's for Mr. Ramsey. Thanks.
I'm sorry. Mr. Ramsey, go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Brockrock. I'll try to be brief. Absolutely, there's a need for funding for infrastructure in small communities. There's a serious need across the country in a number of different sectors, particularly municipal utilities and other upgrades and retrofits that would meet the government's climate mitigation goals, which are good and which we celebrate. But the CIB model, as we saw play out in Mapleton, demonstrated a unsuitability for that context. The pace, the costs as far as project startup, legal consultation, and negotiation of contracts were significant on the town, which paid hundreds of thousands of dollars without actually getting a project in the end. And when they looked at the CIB project package that they were considering versus funding the project themselves through capital debt, they realized that it would be cheaper to do it themselves because they could finance the project at much cheaper rates themselves, and that is something that I think would be a similar experience for small municipalities across the country with limited financial resources who are wary of getting into more expensive P3 contracts there's a separate answer here too to a question you didn't ask, which is the suitability of private corporations being involved in decisions about public infrastructure that's so vital to Canadians' health, like water and wastewater. But you didn't ask that question, so
Thank you, Mr. Ramsey, and thank you, Mr. Backrack. We're now going to move on to the Conservatives with Mr. Cram. Mr. Cram, you got the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And I just got my 5 minutes previously, so I believe I will be turning my time over to either Mr. Soroka or Mr. Shipley. I'm not sure which one it was.
Mr. Shipley, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Cram. Great team attitude there, everybody. Over the last few weeks, this will be directed to start off with Ms. Skibsky. Over the last few weeks, we've been hearing many comments about obviously some frustrations with projects getting rolled out from the Canada Infrastructure Bank. I've heard that today from you too, I believe. Not to put words in your mouth, Ms. Skibsky, I'll let you speak for yourself in a moment. But I would like to, first of all, relay a quote that I have been given by a municipality when I was doing my own bit of research in the Canada Infrastructure Bank, and it was that in summary, our point of view was that the CIB process and project structuring was opaque. We could not get any straightforward answers, nor could we get clear commitments from the CIB. They did not recommend working with them, which is obviously disheartening. We all want to see jobs get rolled out. We all want to see the economy get back going. So, Ms. Skibsky, I'll direct this towards you because at the beginning, and I am going to quote you a little bit here, I was scribbling off it quickly, so if I'm wrong, correct me. But I believe you said that there was a rollout lag, or the rollout lag was too slow to help with the economic recovery. Obviously, there's some frustration. Would you say this is kind of tied from what I was saying with this bank being opaque and tough to get answers from, and your lag? Is that what you're hearing from your field?
Well, again, and I apologize. I'm in the middle of a really heavy downpour right now. It's just pouring. I can't even see across the street. So, I mean, the first point is trade contractors aren't involved in that sort of first level of looking at where and what projects take place. The lag that you speak of, that happens not only with the CIB, but a lot of infrastructure spending. If you look at sort of the Canada Infrastructure Plan, there's still, money sitting there for like $15 billion. As that program is sort of winding down, it still hasn't been deployed. And it's the deployment that makes a difference to the folks that I work with and for. It's having that project active and started and people on a job site. So, and I understand there's, a lot of projects take a longer planning process, but when these programs are announced, there is a delay in turning that. I mean, the term shovel ready, as I mentioned before, it doesn't really mean anything to the industry. The one thing that does mean something is shovel in the ground, and that's the distinction. This is not from a policy perspective and whether it's difficult to work with the bank. I would know. All I know, it's very hard to get data to sort of see where things lie and which direction they're going in. But the between an announcement and a project, that's where I'm getting questions. I mean, I have contractors in Western Canada that should have had certain projects. They've even gone through the process. I mean, somewhere something is holding them up because they are not started, and until they started, at my end of the food chain, they don't count.
Thank you for that. And one of the things you did mention earlier, and what in part of your answer right there, you mentioned that people on a job site is what's important, and we definitely all agree on that. For an economic recovery, we need to get some jobs rolling and Canada back on track. You mentioned earlier that promises and announcements don't create jobs. Do you just feel from this bank, from this platform, there's been too many promises and announcements, not real action?
Like I said, I went through the website. I looked at the project. I mean, after 4 years, you've got one. I know there's been a number of advisory roles that they've taken with certain projects, but I don't know when the actual date is of many of these things that the bank's involved with. That would certainly help if there was a timeline attached to some of these things. And so when you have money announced for something and a purpose, and after 4 years, if I ask any of my members, have you worked on a job that, was related to this, and they say no, then you lose that impact at that level. It, whether it's even true or not, it's that if people don't know that the bank or infrastructure monies have been spent on something, then it doesn't happen, right? So we've got a delay. That's the problem. We have an announcement. Everyone's like, yes, this is great news. But then I have contractors saying the projects aren't there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Shipley, and thank you, Ms. Skifsky. We're now going to move on to the Liberals. Mr. Alkuri, you got the floor for 5 minutes. You're on mute, Faisal. There you go.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et bienvenue à nos témoins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to our witnesses. Their presence here is very much appreciated. My first question is addressed to Dr. Reardon and possibly Ms. Svisky if she has time, if I have time. The bank is working with various promoters to provide expert advice and to find solutions that are creative financing solutions. Could you tell us talk about the role of the bank could play, and how creative financing would help to launch a few projects? Secondly, as you know, we're in a health crisis right now. The pandemic is an overwhelming problem for the entire world and in Canada as well. The priority of this government, on behalf of all Canadians, is to launch or relaunch the economy for the benefit and well-being of all Canadians. Or perhaps, if we see it from a more conservative point of view, Mr. Scheer, for example, who is looking for cuts of more than $12 billion. Could you
Yeah, I think it's been well established by this committee that
It was 18 billion.
accusation is false, that it's the Liberal government
Okay,
that's
so
led
that's not a point of order,
40%
Mr.
of the
Chair. That's
infrastructure money
actually
last.
debate. So
Can I
get you
please
back on
raise on a
mute.
point of order, Mr. Chair?
Alkuri. Mr. Biddle, go ahead. Point of order.
This is now the second time that Mr. Scheer has interrupted. As the former Speaker of the House, the former Leader of the Opposition, I would think he would know the standing orders better than most of us, and I call on him to apologize. This interruption isn't good for the translation. It's clearly not good for the debate, and it's a violation of the standing orders. And if he doesn't like what's being said, he had an opportunity to speak, and we'll have another opportunity again.
Thank you, Mr. Biddle. Mr. Scheer.
Respond. Yeah, I can respond to that. And I think you wouldn't need to have points of order raised if Liberals didn't bring up.
Okay, so that's not a point of order. That's a point of debate.
I raised a point of order.
Mr. Scheer, that's enough. We're going to go back to Mr. Alkuri. Mr. Alkuri, you have the floor. Go ahead, Mr. Alkuri.
Yes, I'm waiting for answer from Dr. Jordan and from Madame Skivisky.
Mr. Reardon, go ahead, and then we're going to go to Mrs. Skifsky. Mr. Reardon, go ahead. You have the floor.
Thank you very much for the question. That was an interesting exchange. I hope I remember the question, but I think it was the what are some examples of projects that can help to catalyze investments in the economy, and how can the infrastructure bank help those? And so one of the points that came out of our capital mobilization plan was in the building sector, and there I think the Canada Infrastructure Bank and public-private partnerships, but also just innovative financial solutions can really help. And so there's this odd conundrum that it's both environmentally and economically good for people to invest in, let's say, wrapping their house in a warm jacket, so in this retrofitting, yet people seem not to do that. And institutions like the Canada Infrastructure Bank can nudge, either financially or behaviorally, people towards making decisions that for some reason that we, even as an economist, I don't understand, that people don't tend to make. So I think that's a really clear example of that.
Thank you, Mr. Reardon. We're going to Ms. Skifsky. Go ahead.
Dr. Reardon is trying to refer to the rational economic man, which does not exist. The types of projects, so other than what's already been mentioned, but in terms of building, there are green building technologies. There's you know, permeable paving type of applications like for water management. But there's also simple, like, hospitals, healthcare. Obviously, I mean, if anything, the last year has pointed out to us is some of the lack we have in the area of long-term care and other health care type facilities. Um, Community centers, they all create benefit to local areas, as well as the roads and the broadband. So my point was there's got to be this long-term planning for these sort of mega transformative projects, but there also has to be a shorter term scale for projects that can go up in a year or 2 years, and that aren't quite so extensive, but still have that positive impact to that community and the quality of life for the families that live there.
Thank you, Ms. Skifsky. Mr. Alkuri.
Deuxième question, les témoins de notre...
Second question. The witnesses at our first hearing, Mr. Ban, was talking about essential services and the projects, infrastructure. Essential infrastructure projects can't be built overnight from one day to the next, but we're looking for projects can be realized quickly. However, the government has already identified hundreds of projects which could be operationalized very quickly. I'd like to ask this question of all the witnesses. What are some of these examples?
Mr. Alkuri, your time is at the limit. And for those witnesses, if you want to try and slide part of that answer into some of your answers that you're going to have from future questioners, that would be wonderful. I'm now going to move on to our last round. And yes, I am going to try and get through it. Unfortunately, that little exchange did take some time up. So I'm going to try and get through the next round. We have first off Mr. Soroka, who's going to be up for 5 minutes, followed by Mr. Fillmore, and then 2.5 minutes each for Mr. Barrasso-Duval and Mr. Backrack. Mr. Soroka, you have the floor. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I don't blame you. It's shameful when the Liberals start talking about false information and deflect from their lack of ability to get projects completed. With that, my question goes to Chief Gale. On Tuesday, we heard from a representative from the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Businesses who mentioned there are actually 40 shovel-ready projects in Indigenous communities across Canada. It sounds like many Indigenous communities are putting applications through, but not getting investment. So could you comment on why this is happening?
Gail?
Okay, thank you for the question. I am going to ask my colleague Dilo, who works directly with our communities as the executive director of our organization.
Thank you, Chief. Mr. Edwards?
Thank you. I think there are a couple of ways to answer that. There are varying sizes and scales of projects, and with respect to the comments that Chief Gale has made and the mandate of our organization, we're focused on projects with a capital cost of 100 million or more. So these are large-scale industrial infrastructure and natural resource projects. Certainly, there are a number of smaller projects across the country that are very meaningful and very impactful for Indigenous communities. These projects relate to community infrastructure primarily. There are some economic development projects, of course, but I think when we're looking at community infrastructure, we need to find a better way of delivering projects on tighter timelines and for more effective costs. One of those ways that we can do that is to empower Indigenous communities to have the tools and the capacity to self-deliver projects, because at the end of the day, our members know what is most important for their communities. And there are certain initiatives like the First Nations Infrastructure Institute that is up and coming that will, I think, alleviate some of this backlog. And certainly we're watching that unfold. I do want to take just a moment to draw a distinction here. We see a tie-in between Indigenous participation in major projects and community infrastructure. There is the ability for Indigenous communities to leverage their economic participation in these major projects to secure those revenue streams to then deliver community infrastructure using the proceeds from their involvement as equity owners. So that's certainly something we're looking at as an organization.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. Mr. Soroka?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And that's quite interesting that you talk about how they can leverage different areas and working towards these projects get completed. Do you think that some of the projects maybe don't rate high enough, and that's why they don't click enough boxes, meaning they don't hit the environmental or social side of this, and that's why, Mr. Edwards, they're not able to get these projects even applications started?
I can't, without knowing the details, I can't comment on a project specific basis. But what I can tell you is that there is a huge capacity gap in Indigenous communities when it comes to getting projects off the ground. Our organization exists to help fill some of those gaps. But when you're dealing with an infrastructure deficit in Indigenous communities of between 30 and 40 billion dollars nationally, we've got some work to do.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair, my next question would be more dealing with Mapleton. And I know Mr. Ramsey spoke about it, but I'm not certain if anyone's got more expertise as to why the municipal government decided not to go with that water treatment plant. Was it because of their borrowing capacity, they said, because they could borrow cheaper, or was that the price was getting too high if they went public? So does anyone, and I'm not certain which one of the members would be able to or witnesses speak on that?
Mr. Ramsey?
The mayor of the town and the manager of the town both stated in media reports that they determined that they could that it made more financial sense for the town to do it on their own.
Thank you, Mr. Ramsey. And Mr. Shipley, thank you. I appreciate your intervention, your questions. We're now going to move on to Mr.
Thank
Fillmore.
you, Mr. Chair, but it was Mr. Soroka, but anyway.
I'm sorry. It's because I'm looking at Mr. Shipley. You're right in front of my screen there. So sorry, guys. Thank you, Mr. Soroka. We're now going to move on to Mr. Fillmore. Mr. Fillmore, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Well, as the witnesses and committee members will know, our government has a very ambitious, long-term, well-resourced infrastructure plan, $180 billion plus plan. And we're really planning for 50 years out for our kids and grandkids and for the future here. So it's very understandable, and I get it that there can be some frustration in the first couple of years of the CIB of the infrastructure bank on the pace that projects are coming out. Now, I'd like to put two examples on the record to provide some context for the question that I'd like to ask. And the first is that we have, in the first 4 years, invested $13 billion in transit in just 4 years. That's approximately 13 times the investment in transit from the previous government in their tenure. The second example is that since last March, since the beginning of the pandemic, in a minority government, we have approved over 1,300 infrastructure projects. And to put that in perspective, the previous government in their final 4 years of a majority government approved only 975 projects. So, the CIB, despite this sort of criticism from our colleagues, the CIB has received great praise. Now, Mr. Scheer may not put much stock in the praise of FCM or Clean Energy Canada or Efficiency Canada, who have said wonderful things about the CIB, but he might put some stock in the things that Premier Kenney, the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, the Grain Growers of Canada, the National Cattle Feeders Association have all said about the CIB, heaping praise upon its potential. So odd then again in context of the $18 billion cuts to infrastructure that the Conservative opposition ran on in 2019. So with that context, I'd like to ask a question of Chief Gale or Mr. Edwards, and it's about Indigenous, the need for infrastructure in Indigenous communities. And I'm very aware that the $1 billion commitment for the CIB falls short. It's not going to close the gap. It is a substantial assistance, but I know there's a lot to do here. But I'm wondering if, based on your experiences and expertise, whether there are specific areas or types of Indigenous projects that you think would be most impactful for the CIB to focus on under those First Nations projects.
Chief Gale.
Well, thank you. So our organization doesn't take a position for or against a particular project because we're not a political organization. So we leave the opportunities and the comments in the hands of the community leaders and their elders and their members to be the best spokespersons on issues when it relates to what kind of projects they want to be involved in. And if there's anything Neela would like to add, I'd just open up the floor to him.
Just about what kinds
Mr.
of projects we're looking for, these major projects. What's needed?
Mr. Edwards.
Thank you for the question. I think there is a tremendous opportunity for our members and other Indigenous communities across this country to be leaders in clean energy and net zero project development. Certainly that falls within the bank's mandate. I know and I've heard from many of our members that they want to focus on the electrification of industrial development in their traditional territories. It's something that we're very focused on. But by and large, whatever sector of projects there's still that gap that needs to be filled in terms of making sure that there is equity style capital available at competitive rates for Indigenous communities to become equity owners in projects.
Okay.
Mr. Fillmore.
Thank you for that. I'd like to turn to Ms. Skivsky for a moment, if I could. So we've been talking a lot about, shovel appropriate projects that are ready to go to help spur economic activity while trying to close that infrastructure gap that exists across the country. CIB has committed to supporting energy retrofits, for example, through an investment of $2 billion. And we know that retrofitting buildings is one of the best ways to create jobs quickly, while at the same time helping to transition to a low carbon economy. Would it be possible, Ms. Skivsky, to speak to the importance of these kind of investments for job creation and emissions reduction in your sector?
Ms. Skivsky.
Well, yes, retrofitting, it's certainly all of the mesh trades, the mechanical, electrical, sheet metal, heating, refrigeration trades. That's a big item for them. Other trades are involved as well, not maybe to the same extent, but those are. And again, sometimes what happens is, and there's been discussion about bundling a lot of these retrofits, especially if they're federal government, to the point where the projects get very big and there's a lot of, it becomes cumbersome to sort of bid on that because you have to bid on the whole thing. And it becomes too big. But if you're talking about at the community level or specific, areas, smaller projects, yes, I agree with you. Retrofit is even green construction. I mean, green construction is a matter of design. We always say you design it, and the construction industry will build it. However, what I want to make a point, and I don't want to be sound critical, but announcing a program isn't the same to trade contractors as to having a project that's active. And there is a disconnect somewhere. And I have been in this industry for over 30 years, and I have asked this question many times. Between sort of federal government, provincial government, municipal government, somewhere in that lineup there's a choke point. And maybe it changes and then it's fluid, and that's why it's hard to pin down. But there's a lot of projects that have been approved, and then there's a lot of programs with still a lot of money sitting in them, and a very small proportion projects are actually sort of have been allocated money. Approval again is a level above where it hits the world that I operate in.
Thank you, Ms. Skivsky.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. And Mr. Fillmore, thank you. We're now going to move on for 2.5 minutes to Mr. Braceau-Duval. Mr. Braceau-Duval, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My next question is for Mr. Vick. It's a question about transparency of the bank. I learned through a Columbia Institute study that the Canada Infrastructure Bank doesn't have to follow the same rules as federal governments and federal departments and organizations in terms of access to information. Yet we are talking about huge projects. These are not piddling projects. The Infrastructure Bank funds mega projects. Do you think this is a problem in terms of transparency? Of course. We're talking about major projects of $6 to $10 billion, transportation projects. And at CUPE, when CUPE tries to obtain information, who's got the money, who's spending it, how it's being used, we provide access to information requests, and we get some 2,000 pages that are practically all black. You see some titles and no text. It's extremely difficult to obtain any kind of information on these projects. And when you have this kind of a project that binds public and private interests, well, it's always the public interest that loses out. You don't get transparency, you don't get accountability. And that is never a good thing. It's never a good thing to tell the public that you're going to launch mega projects in their own interest when they can't really see what these projects are. Yes, another question from Madam Skivsky. When we talk about infrastructure, the first thing we say is that it'll create jobs. And yet we've seen cases some PPPs like the Champlain Bridge or the REM, where the cars are built in India and other consortiums abroad. How do you explain this?
Procurement issues. It's the same when a government brings in a foreign general contracting or consortium to be part of a 3P. Looking to our Canadian industry, should be at the forefront of everybody's mind when you're spending Canadian tax dollars. There's been a number of projects where there have been, foreign national firms operating, and then they turn around and leave. Sometimes not a very clean field behind them. There's issues that they've created and they're not accountable for. So that's a whole other topic. And I would strongly suggest that when we're looking at spending Canadian taxpayers' dollars, that we look at Canadian companies that could perform that work.
Thank you. Mr. Barcelona, Duval, thank you as well. We're now going to go on for our last set of questions from the NDP. Mr. Backrack, you get the floor for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a two-part question for Mr. Vick, picking up on something that two of the other witnesses have said. Mr. Riordan said that the real advantage of getting the private sector involved, and I'm paraphrasing here, is that the private sector is good at identifying projects that are the most promising and productive. And we also heard from Ms. Skivsky this idea around the speed at which projects start and the need to get shovels in the ground quickly and get people working. I'm wondering if you can comment on both of these aspects in the context of the REM project. How did the role of the private sector steer the design and the shape of the project in a way that was productive for some, but not necessarily for the public?
Yeah, well, thank you very much. When we have such a big project of public infrastructure, you would think that the first thing you do is call the public authority, which manages and coordinates the infrastructure in Montreal, and say, hey, how can we complement and make and improve transit and increase transit in the metropolitan area? But instead of that, we've had a kind of competing transit project which was created, which is creating a lot of problems with the current public network that is there now. And also something that we've often said for P3s, on time, on budget, and things of that nature. I've lived in Montreal for 15 years. There have been 4, 5, 6 major P3s in Montreal in that period. I can think about the Montreal McGill Super Hospital. There was tons of corruption. It was late. There was millions of dollars of cost overruns. Same thing for the CHUM. Same thing for the Pont Champlain. Same thing that we're expecting for the REM. So, we're kind of always getting into these problems, and sometimes it almost feels like gaslighting to say that The P3s are the way of making these things work well.
Thank you, Mr. Vic. Do you have any more?
Quick question, very quick, and a quick answer, please.
Well, maybe just picking up where Mr. Vic left off, I'm just wondering, what is the best model in your mind for projects like the REM? How would you have preferred to see the federal government invest that time and that money in improving transit in Montreal?
Mr. Vic?
Well, there were projects on the table which were already designed, which would have cost way less money, moved 4 or 5 times more people, built 100 stations instead of 12 new stations. But the right thing to do if you want to build transit is you say, here, we have money to build. You ask the public authority that is supposed to be the expert, and you ask what was the next project that will move the most people, and then you pay for that project that's been on the table sometimes for 10 years, 15 years, instead of bringing in a new player, changing all the rules, and creating havoc within the system.
Thank you, Mr. Vic. And Mr. Bachrach, thank you as well. And to all members, thank you for your interventions this meeting, as well, more if not, or equally, if not more importantly, to all the witnesses. Thank you for your time today. I am sure that your responses and testimony will in fact be part of the final report that we'll present to the House. Again, for your time today, we thank you. Members, before I adjourn this meeting, I want to remind all members that the next study is on targeted infrastructure investments that was put forward by Liberal member Ms. Jacek. This is going to be the next study that we're going to embark on, and that all members should start thinking now about the witness lists for that study. Perhaps we can have a deadline for preliminary witness lists of Friday, March 26th. Our first meeting back after the break is Tuesday, April 13th, and the clerk will need time to book these witnesses. So to all of you, if we can have those lists in by those times, it would be wonderful and make it a lot easier for the clerk. So with that, and there's no other business, I will take this opportunity to adjourn this meeting. To all of you, have a wonderful evening, have a wonderful week, have a wonderful week back in the constituency next week, and we'll see you the following week.
Thank you.